main goal was, this is what you hear from Tehran, was to hit the airport in the Negev desert from which the attack on Damascus was launched. And this is exactly where some of the missiles went through. Now, some would argue these missiles went through the Arrow and Iron Dome system because they were going somewhere where they wouldn't do any harm. The Iranian side would say this was a significant message to send, and if we want, next time we wouldn't give you enough time ahead of our attack and we could do more harm. So we have victory speeches on both sides, if you will.
And in terms of the response we've seen from Iran and this attack that they launched over the weekend on Israel itself, what were their calculations when they were deciding how to respond?
I believe it is fair to say that Iran wanted to do something that it had never done before and to do something people wouldn't expect. So I would also consider myself someone who watches Iran for quite some time, and I also didn't expect an attack like that happening. Coming from Iranian territory, also the sheer scope of missiles and drones being launched. Iran wanted to do something that is unprecedented. At the same time, and that's the continuity of similar things Iran has done in the past, Iran wanted to make sure that nothing big happens in terms of casualties or actual lives being taken, similar to the retaliatory attack to the assassination of Qasem Soleimani that you just mentioned. So here we saw a mix of breaking out of previous behavioral patterns in such circumstances, while at the same time some continuity.
And will they judge the operation to have been a success? I mean, in Israel, they're viewing it almost as a success because of the success of the Iron Dome in preventing too much damage. Will Iran look at it and think, actually, we would have wanted to have sustained more damage on Israel?
Look, James, the interesting thing is that there is a beauty in what you just said. I mean, beauty sounds a bit too euphemistic. Let's say a silver lining in what happened. And that is that the Israeli side can claim victory for its defense capabilities. And they are doing that, as you just outlined. And the Iranian side are celebrating this as a huge success in saying this was just something that happened with us giving them more than 10 days to prepare for our attack. First. Second, what our main goal was, this is what you hear from Tehran, was to hit the airport in the Negev desert from which the attack on Damascus was launched. And this is exactly where some of the missiles went through. Now, some would argue these missiles went through the Arrow and Iron Dome system because they were going somewhere where they wouldn't do any harm. The Iranian side would say, this was a significant message to send, and if we want, next time we wouldn't give you enough time ahead of our attack and we could do more harm. So we have victory speeches on both sides, if you will.
And give me a sense, if you can, Adnan, on what Iran's military capabilities are at the moment. I mean, had they wished to sustain more damage to Israel, what could they do?
To me, that's a question mark as well, and I would overstretch my, let's say, knowledge if I were to tell you what exactly Iran could do. At this moment, I think it is fair to say that Iran knew that, as the Israeli media stated and as officials stated, 99% of those things that were launched would be intercepted. It's difficult for me to assess if in any scenario that could be different. So I would leave that to military experts.
Does Iran want escalation at this point?
Certainly not. And the reason for that is that Iran's situation back at home is not such that either the population nor the state of the economy would be making Iran strong enough, or would make Iran strong enough for a regional escalation in which it would be dragged in. So I think Iran's goal, regardless of whether they achieve it or not, but Iran's goal with this operation was to de-escalate while escalating, to somehow seek something which is a bit of a mini shock and awe, if you will, and in one way or another show, stop messing with us, and then nothing more will happen. Whether that is accepted in the region, whether that is accepted in Israel or the US, we obviously don't know. At this point, it seems as if in the US that is accepted for things to now really calm down. On the Israeli side, I don't know that this would have to be answered by those who know better than me about Israeli politics.
Well, that's the crucial question now. We wait to see what Israel does next. I mean, let's say Israel did launch an attack, and we can talk in a moment about what those options are. But let's say it launched an attack on Iran now in the coming days and weeks. Would Iran then feel duty-bound to respond again in turn? And does the risk of escalation come from that?
Yeah, I mean, they're vowing basically to do so. They're already saying this. It would just take seconds for us to retaliate if there was an Israeli attack on our soil. And here I go back to the point that Iran is breaking out of formerly known behavioral patterns. If you had asked me like 8 months ago, I would say no, Iran would not retaliate if there was to be an Israeli attack on Iranian soil. Now I'm not so sure. We have to say that the red lines that may have existed in a tacit agreement between both countries have been pushed significantly farther. And if now attacking Israeli territory without doing harm can be matched by attacking Iranian territory without doing harm, then that possibly can make us see a scenario in which Israel strikes something in Iran without Iran feeling the need to respond. If Iranians get killed, regardless of military personnel or civilians, that's probably a different story then.
It's really interesting, Adnan, what you just said there about, Iran now is maybe in a different position. Its thinking is different from 8 months ago. Can you just expand on that? What do you mean by that?
I think this is something that has been in the making. Iran generally, when looking in its affairs with particularly, let's say, Western states or its adversaries, and of course the US here is the biggest player, Iran always sought to either seek deterrence towards the US to keep the US away from doing harm to Iran. For deterrence, it had its means of asymmetric warfare, being aligned groups, the so-called non-state actors, at times called proxies. Iran has its nuclear program, which it sometimes turned to a deterrence factor, which we may see in the future again. The alternative to the deterrence bit was the diplomacy bit. And diplomacy happened in 2002 when Iran was seeking this grand bargain back then with the George W. Bush administration, which was rejected. And the diplomacy bit happened throughout the JCPOA, which was also a big failure. And what this can lead up to is that we will not be able to define a good relationship with the US through diplomatic means, but we will have to scare them to some sort of grand bargain. And this can make Iran a more dangerous actor, I believe. And a new generation comes up in military and strategic circles in Iran that may be fostering this line of thought.
Of the potential Israeli responses, what would be the most inflammatory? Would it be an attack on Iran's nuclear program?
We have to appreciate the fact that such attacks in the past have already happened. So there had been cyber attacks, there had been presumably drone attacks on nuclear sites, some sort of sabotage acts happening on the ground. Something like that has happened before. And I think any strike or operation that does some damage, but not significant damage, it's difficult to define that. But I would say if we saw damage that can be from which Iran can recover in a matter of, 2 weeks, 6 months, 2 years, then probably nothing will happen. If military personnel gets killed, if civilians get killed, then of course that's a huge different story, and brings us to completely new calculations.
Thank you for watching Frontline for Times Radio. For more on global security and the war in Ukraine, you can listen to Times Radio, take out a digital subscription to the Times, and click subscribe on our YouTube channel.